The air in Tupelo, Mississippi, in the mid-1940s, always felt thick and humid, heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. For a skinny boy named Elvis Presley, it also hummed with something else, a silent, insistent music that only he seemed to hear. He wasn't like the other kids who spent their days throwing baseballs or chasing frogs. Elvis spent his time soaking up sounds. The mournful wail of a blues singer drifting from a juke joint, the soaring harmonies of a gospel choir in church, the fast rhythm of country tunes on the radio. His family didn't have much. Their little two-room house was small and money was always tight. But what they lacked in possessions they made up for in love, especially his mother Gladys. She saw something special in her boy, a shyness mixed with a burning spark. She was the one who bought him his first guitar, a cheap, worn instrument that soon became an extension of his own arm. He practiced tirelessly, his fingers fumbling at first, then growing more confident, coaxing melodies from the strings. Elvis loved going to the Assembly of God Church. Not just for the sermons, though he respected them, but for the music. The gospel singing wasn't just pretty. It was a force of nature. It lifted people's spirits, made them clap their hands and sway, sometimes even cry tears of joy. He watched the singers mesmerized, seeing how their voices could touch the very soul of the congregation. He saw the power that music held, how it could unite people, make them feel a shared emotion. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to make people feel that kind of joy, that kind of connection. He'd stand in front of the cracked mirror in his bedroom, the guitar clutched tight, and imagine he wasn't just strumming chords. He was performing. He'd close his eyes and picture a vast, unseen crowd, their faces turned up to him, listening, captivated. He'd sway his hips, moving without conscious thought, lost in the rhythm. He wasn't trying to be scandalous. He was just feeling the music deep in his bones, letting it guide him. Sometimes he'd imagine their cheers a roar of approval that would shake the very foundations of his little house. It was a silly daydream, maybe, for a quiet boy from Tupelo, but it was a dream that felt as real as the calluses on his fingertips. When his family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, things changed. Memphis was bigger, louder, bursting with different sounds. Beale Street pulsed with the blues. Sun Records was making waves with new sounds, and radio stations played everything from hillbilly to R&B. Elvis, still shy but more determined, found work where he could, driving a truck, trying to make ends meet, but the music never stopped calling him. He'd pass Sun Records, a small, unassuming building, and feel a pull. That was where the magic happened, where everyday people walked in and sometimes walked out with a song that changed their lives. One day he just walked in. It was a brave step for a boy who still blushed easily. He paid the $4 to record a song for his mother, a sentimental ballad. It was an excuse, of course, a way to get his voice heard. The studio owner, Sam Phillips, wasn't there that day, but his assistant noted the unique quality of Elvis's voice. Later, Sam heard the demo. He recognized something different, something raw and electric, a sound that blended country and blues in a way no one else had. He called Elvis back. Those first recording sessions were nerve-wracking, thrilling. Elvis, with his bass player Bill Black and guitarist Scotty Moore, experiment. They stumbled upon something new, something explosive, a sound that would soon be called rock and roll. Their version of "That's All Right" wasn't just a song, it was a declaration. It was Elvis singing with a freedom he'd never known, his voice jumping from smooth and tender to wild and unrestrained. When the song was played on the radio, Elvis was at a movie theater trying to calm his shaking hands. The DJ introduced it, and then it happened. The phones of the radio station lit up. People wanted to know who that kid was, the one with the crazy voice, and the name that sounded like it belonged on a movie marquee. Suddenly, the silent music in Elvis's head wasn't so silent anymore. It was becoming real, spilling out into the world. He hadn't asked for fame, not really. He had just wanted to sing, to share the music that lived inside him. But as the requests for his song poured in, and as the small local gigs started to grow into bigger ones, Elvis began to feel the first faint stirrings of a different kind of power. Not a power over others, but the power of connection, the power to make people feel, and maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of his crown. The dream he'd had in Tupelo, imagining a crowd was starting to shimmer into existence. He could almost hear the roar, and it was a sound that made his shy heart beat faster than any rhythm he'd ever played. The first few gigs, after That's All Right, hit the airwaves, were small, mostly in local clubs or school auditoriums. Elvis, Scotty, and Bill, known as the Blue Moon Boys, would pull up in a beat-up car, set up their meager equipment, and prepare to play. Elvis still felt a surge of nerves before stepping onto any stage, no matter how small. His hands would tremble and his stomach would knot up, but the moment the music started, something shifted. It was like a switch flipped inside him. He'd strum the first chords, and his voice, that unique blend of country twang and bluesy sorrow, would fill the room. And then his body would start to move. It wasn't a planned dance, not really. It was just the music taking over, flowing through him. His legs would shake, his hips would swivel, his arms would flail in time with the beat. He wasn't trying to be provocative. He was just feeling the rhythm so intensely that he couldn't stand still. It was raw, uninhibited, and unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Crowds reacted with a mix of awe, confusion, and outright hysteria. Older folks sometimes looked scandalized, their mouths agape. Young women, though, would scream, not just a polite applause, but a full-throated, ear-splitting shriek that seemed to come from deep within. They'd rush the stage, desperate to touch him, to get closer to this electrifying presence. Elvis, still bewildered by the reaction, would often blush, but he couldn't stop. The energy from the audience fed his own, creating a powerful feedback loop. One particular night at a show in Jacksonville, Florida, the reaction reached a fever pitch. The hall was packed. Sweat dripped from the ceiling and the air crackled with anticipation. As Elvis launched into one of his faster numbers, his hips started their now famous sway. A wave of screams erupted from the female fans. They surged forward, a sea of outstretched hands, eyes wide with adoration. Elvis, startled but energized, kept going, his movements growing more frantic, his voice soaring. The local authorities, concerned by the commotion and the impact Elvis's movements seemed to have on the young women, had warned him. They even had a police officer standing in the wings ready to intervene. During the show, Elvis, aware of the warning but unwilling to completely stop expressing himself, made a joke. He told the crowd, "Folks, the police told me not to move, so I'll just keep my knees stiff." Then, with a mischievous grin, he wiggled his finger. The crowd roared. It was a small act of rebellion, a sign that he wouldn't be easily contained, and it only intensified their adoration. He wasn't just singing songs, he was liberating something. He was giving a voice to a generation that felt misunderstood, constrained. His music was loud, exciting, and rebellious, and his movements were a physical embodiment of that freedom. Teenagers especially felt seen and heard. They were tired of the bland, polite music their parents listened to. Elvis was raw, real, and exciting. He spoke their language. The national television appearances started soon after. First, local shows, then bigger ones, like the Milton Berle Show and the Ed Sullivan Show. Each appearance brought his music and his unique style to millions more homes. The first time he performed on national TV, he was a ball of nerves. Paced backstage, adjusting his clothes, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. But when the lights hit him and the cameras rolled, he transformed. Cameras tried to censor him, focusing only on his upper body during some performances, fearing his pelvis would be too shocking for American living rooms. But even with just his upper body showing, his energy was palpable. His voice soared, his eyes burned with passion, and his charisma was undeniable. The screens from the live studio audience were deafening, and phone lines at the networks lit up both with complaints and with desperate pleas for more. He was becoming a phenomenon, a force of nature. His records topped the charts, his face was plastered on magazines, and his name was on everyone's lips. He went from a shy truck driver to a national sensation in what felt like the blink of an eye. The sheer speed of it all was dizzying. Elvis didn't quite understand the why of the screams and the adoration. He just knew he loved to sing. He loved the feeling of the music moving through him. And he loved the way it seemed to connect him to the people in the audience. When he looked out at those faces, whether they were screaming or just watching in mesmerized silence, he felt a profound sense of purpose. It was like he was giving them something they needed, something joyful and liberating. He was still the same humble boy from Tupelo in many ways, still kind, still respectful. But now, when he stepped onto a stage, he wasn't just performing. He was stepping into a role, a destiny that seemed to have been waiting for him. The energy that washed over him from the crowd wasn't just noise. It was the foundation of his kingdom, the beginning of his crown. Each roar, each shriek, each outstretched hand was a thread in the magnificent invisible tapestry that was forming around him. He was no longer just Elvis Presley. He was Elvis the King, and the clamor of the sold-out stadiums was his first royal decree. He felt it deep in his chest, this thrilling, terrifying, beautiful wave of connection. And he knew instinctively that this was just the beginning. The transition from Sun Records to RCA Victor in 1955 was like stepping from a small pond into an ocean. Suddenly, Elvis wasn't just a regional hit. He was a national, then an international sensation. RCA had the machinery to push his music everywhere. Records flew off the shelves. Songs like Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, and Don't Be Cruel became instant classics, defining the sound of a new era. The crowds grew larger, almost impossibly so. Stadiums that once hosted football games now filled with screaming fans, all there for one reason: Elvis. When he stepped onto those massive stages, bathed in spotlights, the roar was deafening. It wasn't just noise. It was a physical force, a tidal wave of adoration that hit him the moment he appeared. He'd walk to the microphone grin, that famous crooked grin, and a new wave of shrieks would erupt. He was still relatively young, barely out of his teens, and the sheer scale of his fame was overwhelming. He'd look out at the sea of faces, thousands upon thousands, all looking at him, all wanting a piece of him. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and deeply humbling all at once. He often said he didn't understand why people reacted the way they did. He was just a singer, a boy who loved music, but what he offered was more than just songs. He offered freedom, excitement, a release from the ordinary. He didn't just stand and sing. He didn't just stand and sing. He lived the music. His energy was boundless. He'd strut across the stage, his sequin jumpsuits catching the light, his voice soaring from a low growl to a high, clear note. He'd throw out scarves to the desperate hands reaching from the crowd, and those scarves became cherished relics infused with some of his magic. Every gesture, every glance, every swivel of his hips sent ripples of electricity through the audience. There was a moment during one concert in late 1956 that truly solidified the connection, even for Elvis. He was performing in Tupelo, his hometown, at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show. It was a homecoming, a moment to show the folks who remembered him as the shy kid from the poorest part of town just how far he'd come. The stadium was packed to the rafters, overflowing with people who had known him since he was small. As he walked onto the makeshift stage, the roar was different here. It wasn't just the wild adulation of strangers. It was laced with pride, with familiarity, with a deep, almost familial love. He saw faces he recognized from church, from school, from the old neighborhood. His mother and father were there, beaming from the side of the stage. For a moment, the overwhelming fame faded, and he was just Elvis singing for his people. He sang his heart out that day, pouring every ounce of emotion into each note. He told the crowd, "This is the greatest day of my life." And in that moment, surrounded by the people who knew him best, and thousands more who had just discovered him, he felt the true weight and joy of his burgeoning crown. It wasn't a physical object, but the tangible love and excitement of the crowd. Their screams, their tears, their outstretched hands, they were the jewels. But the crown also came with its challenges. The relentless schedule, the constant travel, the never-ending demands on his time and energy were exhausting. He lived in a bubble surrounded by managers and bodyguards, rarely, truly alone. The fame that granted him incredible opportunities also robbed him of ordinary life. He couldn't go to a movie theater or a restaurant or even walk down the street without being mobbed. His world became hotel rooms, concert venues, and the brief exhilarating moments on stage. There were moments of quiet introspection. He'd sometimes stand vaxxed, listening to the roar of the crowd before his entrance, and a wave of awe would wash over him. All this for me, he'd think. He wasn't arrogant. He was genuinely bewildered by the level of devotion. He never forgot where he came from, never took his fans for granted. He felt a deep responsibility to them, to give them his all. Every single night he learned to channel the energy of the crowd. He fed off their screams, letting their excitement fuel his performance. He understood instinctively that the connection was a two-way street. He gave them his passion, his voice, his electrifying presence, and they gave him their unrestrained adoration, their energy, their belief in him. It was a powerful exchange, a symbiotic relationship that defined his career. As 1957 came to a close, Elvis was arguably the most famous person in the world. He had conquered radio, television, and the live stage. His music had reshaped popular culture, and his image was iconic. The dreams of the shy boy from Tupelo had exploded into a reality far grander than he could have ever imagined. He was a king without a throne, but with a kingdom that stretched across continents, built on the raw, undeniable power of his music and the overwhelming love of his fans. And their screams, a permanent backdrop to his life, were the magnificent sound of his crown solidifying into an unshakable reality. He wore it not on his head but in his heart, in every note he sang, in every hip swivel, in every moment he spent bathed in the fervent gaze of a sold-out stadium. Just when his star was shining brightest, at the absolute peak of his fame, Elvis Presley made a decision that shocked the world. He would join the United States Army. It was early 1958, and he had just released hits like Jailhouse Rock and King Creole. He was the undisputed king of rock and roll. His face on every magazine, his voice on every radio. And then he traded his sequin jumpsuits for a military uniform. For Elvis, it wasn't a calculated career move. It was a matter of principle and duty. He felt it was the right thing to do, to serve his country just like any other young man. He didn't want special treatment, no easy gigs entertaining troops behind the lines. He wanted to be a regular soldier, to prove that he was more than just a hip-swiveling rock star. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, initially tried to delay it, to arrange for him to serve in the special services, but Elvis was firm. He wanted to be a regular GI. The day he shipped off to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, was a media circus. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and fans cried openly. His iconic pompadour was shaved, and for the first time in years, Elvis looked less like a superstar, and more like the boy from Tupelo. It was a jarring image for many, seeing their idol stripped of his flamboyant persona. Life in the Army was a stark contrast to his pampered existence as a celebrity. He slept in a barracks with other men, ate in a mess hall, and woke up to the sound of reveille instead of the roar of a crowd. He learned to march, to clean his rifle, to follow orders without question. It was a leveler, a humbling experience that forced him to reconnect with the ordinary. He wasn't entirely anonymous, of course. His fellow soldiers knew who he was, and the curious stares and whispered comments were constant. But for the most part, he was treated with respect, like one of them. He played his guitar for his bunkmates, sharing songs and stories. He often bought extra food for his fellow soldiers when they were on leave, showing the generous spirit that was a core part of his character. He even sent money back home, helping out other soldiers' family. While he was stationed in Germany, serving as a jeep driver, life took another turn. His mother Gladys, his anchor and closest confidant, fell ill. He was granted an emergency leave to visit her, but it was too late. She passed away in August 1958. It was a devastating blow for Elvis, a loss that profoundly affected him. She had been the one who always believed in him, who encouraged his dreams. Her death left a deep void in his heart, a quiet sorrow that would stay with him. The Army years were a time of forced reflection. Away from the constant spotlight, the endless demands, the deafening screams, Elvis had a chance to breathe, to simply be. He thought about his music, about his future, about the kind of artist he wanted to be. He listened to different styles of music, widening his own musical horizons. He often found himself strumming his guitar in the quiet of his barracks, just for the love of it, rediscovering the pure joy of making music without the pressure of a million eyes. Watching his fans. Meanwhile, the music industry speculated. Would he still be relevant when he returned? Would rock and roll have moved on? But Elvis's manager had planned carefully, releasing new recordings made before his enlistment, keeping his name in the public eye. And the fans, particularly the younger ones, remained fiercely loyal. They wrote letters, they talked about him constantly, they played his old records until they were worn thin. They hadn't forgotten their king. His crown, which had seemed so dazzling and solid, was now in a different kind of formation. It wasn't being forged by the immediate roar of stadium crowds, but by the quiet loyalty of millions who continued to believe in him even from afar. It was being polished by his humility, his dedication to duty, and his personal growth. He was proving that his appeal wasn't just about the wild gyrations or the flashy clothes. It was about the man himself, his charisma, his voice, his authentic connection. When he finally returned to American soil in March 1960, a hero's welcome awaited him. The news reports were ecstatic. Fans swarmed the docks, waving signs, screaming his name. It was clear that the world hadn't forgotten Elvis Presley. If anything, his absence had only made the heart grow fonder. As he stepped off the troop carrier back into the blinding glare of the cameras and the deafening roar of the crowd, Elvis felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness for his mother, gratitude for his service, and the powerful sense of anticipation. He had left as a wild, untamed rock and roller. He returned as a more mature, thoughtful man, ready to reclaim his place. His crown hadn't tarnished, it had deepened. It was waiting for him, more resplendent than ever, held aloft by the collective anticipation of a world ready to scream his name once more. He was home, and the silent hum of his crown was about to burst back into full, glorious sound. Returning from the Army in 1960, Elvis was ready to pick up where he left off. The world was eager for new music, new performances. However, his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had a different vision. He saw Hollywood as the next logical step, a way to cement Elvis's image as a mainstream, family-friendly entertainer, reaching an even wider audience. Elvis, ever loyal to the Colonel and still reeling from the loss of his mother, agreed. He was eager to work, to get back into the rhythm of creating. His first post-Army film, G.I. Blue, was a box office success, and the soundtrack album soared. More films followed: Flaming Star, Wild in the Country, Blue Hawaii. For nearly a decade, Hollywood became his primary focus. The movie sets were different from the raw energy of live concerts. Everything was controlled, scripted, and often a little sterile. Elvis would spend his days learning lines, hitting his marks, and lip-syncing songs that were often chosen more for their marketability than their musical depth. He was still singing, still making music, but it felt different, diluted. Perhaps he released dozens of film soundtracks, and many of the songs were hits. People still bought his records, still flocked to his movies. He was still undeniably popular, still a massive star. But a part of him yearned for the immediacy of a live audience, the spontaneous connection he used to feel when he was just a kid shaking his hips on a stage in a small town. The films, while financially successful, often felt like a cage. He was given little creative control, starring in light-hearted musical comedies that, while charming, didn't challenge him as an actor or as a musician. He wanted to do serious roles, to sing powerful, emotional songs. He tried to push for more dramatic parts, for better music, but the Colonel, ever focused on the bottom line, resisted. Stick to the formula. He'd say, "It works." Elvis felt a growing disconnect from his true artistic self. He would record songs for his albums that were more authentic to his roots, but these rarely got the same promotional push as the movie soundtracks. He was famous, wealthy, and successful beyond measure, but there was a quiet ache, a sense that he was losing something vital. His crown in this era was still incredibly bright, but its light was diffused, scattered across movie screens, rather than focused in the intense beam of a live stage. The screens were still there, but they were from fans watching his films, not from people experiencing his raw, unadulterated talent in person. He hadn't performed a live concert for years. The roar of a sold-out stadium, the very sound that defined his crown, had faded into a distant echo. He surrounded himself with his Memphis mafia, a loyal group of friends and cousins who became his extended family and protective shield. They were his connection to a semblance of normalcy, his companions in the gilded cage of fame. He found solace in their company, in late-night talks, in simple games of football in his backyard, despite the artistic frustration. Elvis was still Elvis. He was still incredibly generous, often giving away cars, jewelry, and cash to friends, family, and even strangers. He was still deeply spiritual, spending hours reading about different philosophies and religions. He still loved his fans, reading their letters, signing autographs, whenever he could. The direct link, the powerful current that flowed between him and a live audience was missing. He started to gain weight, to feel the strain of the relentless pace and the growing sense of artistic stagnation. He tried to find escape in different ways through hobbies, through late-night conversations, but the void remained. He missed the feeling of the stage, the adrenaline, the pure joy of connecting with people through his music, unscripted and unvarnished. As the 1960s wore on, the music landscape changed. The British invasion, led by the Beatles, brought a new sound, a new energy. While Elvis remained a legend, he was no longer the dominant force he once was. His crown, while still recognized, felt less vibrant, less connected to the pulse of popular culture. There was a quiet yearning in him, a longing to step back into the spotlight, not as an actor, but as the singer, the performer, the force of nature he truly was. He knew he had to make a change. The comfortable, lucrative world of Hollywood was becoming stifling. He needed to feel the raw energy of a live audience again. He needed to hear those screams, not on movie soundtrack, but live in person, feeling the collective spirit of a sold-out stadium. He needed to reclaim his crown, to polish it anew, and to once again let its brilliant light shine directly from the stage. The idea, once a faint whisper, began to grow louder, more insistent, promising a redemption he desperately craved. The king was ready to return to his throne. The stage, the year 1968, the world had changed. Music had exploded in new directions. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, a new generation of artists had taken the stage. Elvis, after years spent making movies, was still famous, but many wondered if he was still relevant. His last live performance had been in 1961. The whispers were loud. Was the king still a king? Colonel Tom Parker, always looking for a new angle, agreed to a television special. Not a concert at first, but a Christmas variety show. Elvis, however, had a different idea. He saw it as his chance, his last real chance to reclaim his musical identity. He insisted on a show that would bring him back to his roots. Raw, live performance, just him and his music. The producers were hesitant, but Elvis was determined. The special, officially titled Elvis, but forever known as the 68 Comeback Special, was filmed in June 1968. The setting was intimate, a small stage surrounded by a close-up audience, just like the early days. No huge stadiums yet, but the energy was there. Elvis walked onto the stage, dressed not in a flashy outfit, but in a simple, sleek, black leather suit. He looked lean, dangerous, and utterly captivating. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his eyes blazing with a mixture of nerves and fierce determination. The moment he appeared, a gasp went through the audience, followed by a roar of applause. He picked up his guitar, a rare sight in his Hollywood years, and started to play. His voice, matured by time and experience, was richer, deeper, but still held that unmistakable primal power. Played his early hits, but with a new intensity, a newfound conviction. He jammed with his original band members, Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana. He talked to the audience, joked, shared stories. He was natural, unscripted, genuine. It was Elvis, unleashed, unfiltered. The man and the music laid bare. He performed, seated with his band, in an informal, in-the-round setting, reminiscing and singing. This segment particularly showed a vulnerable, charming, and still incredibly powerful Elvis. His charisma filled the room. Then the television screens across the nation. For many, it was like seeing him for the first time again. The king was back, and he was more potent than ever. He wasn't just a singer. He was a force of nature, a living legend. He proved that his talent wasn't a product of the 50s. It was timeless. He could still command a stage, still ignite an audience with just a look, a gesture, a single note. The highlight of the special for many was the closing number, "If I Can Dream," dressed in a pristine white suit against a backdrop of glowing red letters spelling out Elvis. He sang with an emotional depth rarely heard before. It was a powerful anthem, a plea for peace and understanding delivered with such passion that it resonated deeply in a turbulent ear. As he sang, his face intense, his voice soaring, you could feel the weight of his personal journey, his longing to connect, his desire to use his voice for something meaningful. When the special aired in December 1968, the impact was immediate and monumental. Critics raved, audiences were stunned, the ratings were through the roof. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a recoronation. Public realized that the king hadn't gone anywhere. He had just been waiting for the right moment to remind them of his power. For Elvis, the special was more than just a ratings success. It was a personal triumph. He felt alive again, truly alive in a way he hadn't in years. He felt the direct connection with his fans, even through the television screen. He saw their reaction, read the reviews, felt the surge of renewed adoration. The crown, which had felt heavy and dull during the movie years, suddenly sparkled with a renewed brilliance. The sound of the audience during the special, their excited murmurs, their appreciative applause, their gasps of recognition. It wasn't the deafening roar of a stadium yet, but it was the promise of it. It was the sound of his kingdom, remembering its king, and welcoming him back with open arms. He had stripped away the movie roles, the manufactured image, and revealed the raw, authentic Elvis, the one who lived for the music and for the connection with his audience. This special wasn't just a nostalgic look back. It was a powerful statement of purpose. Elvis was ready to perform live again, to step onto the biggest stages and to once again feel the full, overwhelming force of a sold-out stadium screaming his name. He had rediscovered his voice, his passion, and the core of what made him special. Crown was not only back, it was shining brighter than ever, ready to illuminate the biggest arenas in the world. He was ready to take his place on the throne, the live stage, and rule. Once more, the success of the '68 comeback special was undeniable. It wasn't just a flash in the pan, it was a clear signal. Elvis was back, and this time he wanted to be where he truly belonged, on stage, in front of a live audience. The first opportunity came in Las Vegas, a city built on spectacle and entertainment. In July 1969, Elvis opened his residency at the brand new International Hotel in Las Vegas. It was a bold move, a gamble. Vegas showrooms were typically for older, more sedate performers. Could Elvis, the wild rock and roller, command a Vegas stage, night after night? The answer, as it turned out, was a resounding yes. The opening night was electric. The International Hotel showroom was packed with celebrities, critics, and thousands of devoted fans. When Elvis walked onto the stage, dressed in a magnificent custom-designed white jumpsuit, a dazzling outfit that would become his signature, look, the roar was instantaneous and overwhelming. It was the sound of a sold-out stadium, amplified, distilled, and directed squarely at him. He was backed by a full orchestra, a gospel choir, and a dynamic rock and roll band. The sound was huge, lush, and powerful. He opened with blue suede shoes, then launched into a medley of his classics, followed by new, more contemporary songs. He was a master showman, commanding the stage with every move, every gesture. He still had the hip swivel, the intensity, the raw charisma, but now there was a new maturity, a deeper vocal range, and a refined sense of theatricality. He sang his heart out, pouring every ounce of energy into each performance. He worked the room, engaging with the audience, throwing scarves, sharing jokes. He wasn't just performing, he was celebrating, reveling in the direct connection he'd missed for so long. The screams were back louder than ever, mixed with cheers and rapturous applause. Women rushed the stage trying to touch his hand to grab a scarf. It was pandemonium. Every single night the Vegas residency was a monumental success. He broke all attendance records, selling out every single show for weeks on end. His initial engagement was extended repeatedly. He became a fixture, the undisputed king of Las Vegas, returning season after season. For years, the International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton, was his home. Away from home, the demands of the Vegas schedule were immense. 2 shows a night, 7 nights a week, for weeks on end. It was physically grueling, vocally challenging, and mentally exhausting, yet Elvis thrived on it. He loved the routine, the discipline, the immediate feedback from the audience. He loved the feeling of walking out onto that stage, feeling the collective anticipation, and then unleashing his voice, his energy, his entire being. His crown in this era was glittering, heavy, and undeniably magnificent. It wasn't just one stadium, but a continuous stream of sold-out shows. Night after night, month after month, each performance was a reaffirmation of his kingship. The screams were no longer just a novelty. They were the constant soundtrack of his life, a testament to his enduring power and appeal. He sang "Suspicious Minds," "In the Ghetto," and "Proud Mary" with an intensity that made them his own. Closed his shows with "Can't Help," "Falling in Love," often descending into the audience, shaking hands, connecting with his devoted fans. These moments were incredibly important to him. He genuinely appreciated the people who had stood by him, who had waited for his return. Offstage life was still complicated. The bubble of fame persisted, even intensified. He had a vast entourage, but sometimes the loneliness of superstardom crept in. Yet, when he was on stage, all of that faded away. The music, the lights, the roar of the crowd, that was his truth, his refuge. The Vegas era also saw him embark on major concert tours across the United States, playing massive arenas. They were toriums. These arrival in any city was met with frenzied excitement. The arenas would sell out in hours when he stepped onto those stages. The impact was visceral. Collective energy of tens of thousands of people screaming his name was something almost spiritual. He was wearing the crown fully now, not just wearing it, but embodying it. He was the king, and the sold-out stadiums were his throne rooms. The deafening roar of the crowd, a constant symphony of adoration, was his coronation song, played over and over again, night after night. It was an affirmation of his journey from the shy boy in Tupelo to the most famous entertainer in the world, whose true crown was the love, excitement, and undying devotion of his millions of fans. Behind the dazzling lights and the thunderous applause of a sold-out stadium, Elvis Presley lived a life that was both incredibly glamorous and strangely isolating. He had achieved every dream he ever had and the undying adoration of millions. Yet the crown of superstardom, while magnificent, could also be a lonely burden. His home, Graceland, was a sanctuary, but it was also a fortress. Walls and gates protected him from the constant intrusion of fans and paparazzi. Inside, he surrounded himself with his Memphis mafia, a loyal group of friends, bodyguards and cousins who lived with him, traveled with him, and were always there for him. They were his chosen family, his constant companions. They played games, watched movies, rode horses, and shared late-night conversations. They provided a semblance of normalcy in an otherwise extraordinary existence. Elvis was incredibly generous, often showering his friends and family with gifts, cars, jewelry, cash, even houses. He loved to see people happy, and giving was a core part of his nature. He famously bought cars for strangers he met on the street, driven by an impulsive kindness. He carried a wad of cash and would hand it out to those in need, sometimes even paying off people's debts. This generosity wasn't for show. It was simply who he was, a reflection of his humble beginnings and his deep empathy. Despite the constant company, Elvis often found himself alone in his thoughts. The demands of fame were relentless. Every move he made was scrutinized, every word he spoke analyzed. He couldn't go anywhere without being recognized, mobbed, or photographed. The world outside Graceland became a spectacle, not a place for quiet reflection. He missed the simple things, going to the movies unnoticed, grabbing a burger at a diner, or just taking a walk without an entourage. He had a deep spiritual side. He spent hours reading books on religion, philosophy, and various belief systems, always searching for deeper meaning, for answers to life's big questions. He was fascinated by the unknown, by the mysteries of existence. He sometimes felt the pressure of his image, the expectation to always be the king, and his spiritual pursuits were a way to ground himself, to remember the man beneath the legend. His personal life was also under immense pressure. His marriage to Priscilla, while initially a source of joy, eventually crumbled under the unique strains of his celebrity. He was constantly touring, constantly surrounded by people, and the privacy needed for a healthy relationship was almost impossible to maintain. He loved his daughter Lisa Marie fiercely, and she brought him immense joy. She was a constant reminder of the pure, unconditional love that existed outside the glare of the spotlight. The truth was, the public Elvis, the dazzling performer, was a carefully constructed persona. The real Elvis was more complex, a shy, humble man who loved gospel music, despised confrontation, and often felt lonely despite being surrounded by hundreds of people. He carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, the pressure to deliver, to be perfect, to always live up to the image of the king. He often battled insomnia, finding it hard to switch off his mind after the adrenaline rush of a performance. He sometimes struggled with his health, exacerbated by the relentless touring schedule and the constant need to be on. The stress of maintaining his immense fame took a toll physically and mentally. But the moment he stepped onto the stage, all the personal struggles faded. The noise of the world outside, the worries, the pressures, they vanished. Only the music remained, and the connection with his audience. Their screams weren't just noise. They were an affirmation, a shared release, a loving embrace. When he heard that roar, he felt loved, understood, and truly at home. His crown wasn't just the sold-out stadiums. It was also the unwavering loyalty of his fans. They understood on some deeper level that he gave them everything he had. They saw his vulnerability, his humanity, and they loved him even more for it. They kept him going, fueled his performances, and reminded him that his music truly touched their lives. Behind the velvet rope, Elvis was a man striving for authenticity in a life built on illusion. He was a kind, generous soul navigating the bewildering landscape of unparalleled fame. And while the crown was heavy, he wore it with grace, knowing that its true power lay not in the glitter and gold, but in the millions of hearts that beat in unison with his music, waiting for his next song, his next performance, his next triumphant roar. He was their king, and their love was his most precious jewel, even in the quiet, lonely moments behind the scenes. As the 1970s progressed, the weight of the crown began to show more visibly on Elvis. The relentless touring schedule, the constant pressure to perform at an impossibly high level, and the underlying personal struggles started to take a significant toll. His Vegas residencies and cross-country tours continued to sell out instantly. Every performance was met with the same deafening screams, the same passionate devotion. But backstage, away from the spotlights, the vibrant energy sometimes flickered. His health became a growing concern. The demands of his schedule, coupled with a need to manage pain and sleep issues, led to a reliance on various medications. He was constantly exhausted, fighting a battle that few outsiders understood. Pressure to maintain his iconic image, to be the king night after night, was immense. He couldn't afford to be sick, to be tired, to be anything less than perfect in front of those screaming crowds. Despite the challenges, his connection with his fans remained unwavering. In fact, in many ways, it deepened. They saw his vulnerability, not just the invincible superstar. They knew he was human, and their love for him seemed to grow stronger, more protective. When he stumbled over lyrics or seemed a little slower on stage, their empathy shone through. Their screams weren't just for his electrifying moves anymore. They were screams of love, encouragement, and understanding. During his shows, there were moments of pure magic, when the old fire would ignite and he would deliver a performance that reminded everyone why he was the king. His voice, though sometimes strained, could still soar with incredible power and emotion. He would sing his signature ballads like American Tria or My Way, and the audience would be reduced to tears, moved by the raw honesty in his delivery. He poured every ounce of his soul into these songs, communicating a depth of feeling that transcended mere entertainment. He still loved performing. The stage was still his sanctuary, the only place where he truly felt in control, truly himself. The roar of the crowd was his lifeline, pulling him out of his inner struggles, making him forget his aches and pains, if only for an hour or two. He lived for those moments of connection, for the shared ecstasy of music. He gave away more scarves, more kisses, more smiles than ever, trying to connect with as many individual faces as he could in the vast sea of adoring fans. There were moments, too, of quiet introspection before or after a show. He'd sit in his dressing room, sometimes for hours, lost in thought. He'd look at the notes and gifts from fans, read their letters filled with love and gratitude. He understood the profound impact he had on their lives. He wasn't just an entertainer, he was a source of joy, comfort, and escape. This understanding fueled him, pushed him to keep going even when he felt utterly depleted. His generosity never wavered. He continued to give away cars and other extravagant gifts, sometimes even from the stage. He had a deep, almost childlike desire to spread happiness, to alleviate suffering, a trait that came directly from his mother's teachings. He would often ask his security to bring sick or disabled fans backstage after a show, spending time with them, making them feel special. These were the moments that truly nourished him, reminding him of the pure, unfiltered love that lay beneath the layers of fame. Crown, which was once a symbol of wild, untamed youth, had matured. It now represented resilience, unwavering dedication, and a profound, enduring connection between an artist and his audience. It was a crown forged not just in flash and spectacle, but in shared experience and decades of mutual devotion. By the mid-1970s, the physical toll became harder to ignore. But still, the sold-out stadiums, continued the screaming crowds, never ceased. They showed up for him through thick and thin, through every rumor and every public struggle. They were a testament to his enduring legacy, a living, breathing monument to his power. Elvis Presley was fighting a private battle, but in front of his fans he was still the king. And their love, their unwavering scream of adoration was the most powerful medicine, the most comforting balm. It was the sound of his crown, heavy but cherished. A testament to a life lived in the unwavering embrace of millions. He wore it not just as a symbol of fame, but as a deep, profound connection to the hearts of the people who loved him, a connection that transcended everything else. The air in the arena was thick with anticipation. It was June 26, 1977. The Market Square Arena was packed. Every seat filled the crowd, a pulsing, vibrant mass of humanity. Elvis Presley was about to step onto the stage for what would, unknowingly to everyone, be his very last concert. He walked out, dressed in his iconic Mexican sundial jumpsuit, its intricate design shimmering under the lights. He looked a little heavier, a little wearier than in his younger days, but the moment he appeared, a familiar, deafening roar erupted. It was the sound that had followed him for over 2 decades, the sound of a sold-out stadium screaming his name, and in that moment he still owned the stage. He greeted the crowd with his characteristic charm, a knowing smile playing on his lips. He launched into Also Sprach Zarathustra, the dramatic opening music, followed by C.C. Ryder, and the arena exploded. His voice, despite the challenges he faced, still held that undeniable power, that unique blend of raw emotion and pure talent. He worked the stage, connecting with the audience, throwing out scarves, his movements still filled with charisma. He sang his classic hits, Jailhouse Rock, Hound Dog, Heartbreak Hotel. But he also delivered powerful ballads like Hurt and My Way, pouring every ounce of his soul into each note. When he sang, he wasn't just performing. He was sharing his heart, his vulnerabilities, his triumphs. The crowd listened, mesmerized, captivated, responding to every nuance of his voice, every tremor of his emotion. The energy in the arena was electric. It was a love affair, pure and unadulterated, between a king and his loyal subjects. Every single person there felt a profound connection to him, a shared history of music and memories. Their screams were just fleeting expressions of excitement. They were a living testament to his enduring impact. The sound of a crown that had been woven from millions of individual hearts. Towards the end of the show, as he performed Can't Help Falling in Love, he moved to the edge of the stage, shaking hands, making eye contact, absorbing the love that washed over him from the crowd. He looked out at the sea of faces illuminated by the stage lights, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. He saw their tears, their joy, their unwavering devotion. He felt the pure, unyielding affection that had sustained him through decades of unparalleled fame. That roar, that collective scream from the sold-out stadium was his crown. It wasn't a physical object, but an intangible, powerful force. It was the sound of millions of people who had been touched by his music, whose lives had been brightened by his presence. It was the affirmation of his unique gift, his ability to connect with humanity on a universal level through song. As he finished the final notes of Can't Help Falling in Love, the applause and screams reached a crescendo. He took his bows, thanked the audience, and walked off stage, disappearing behind the curtains. The lights came up and the crowd slowly dispersed, carrying with them the memory of a truly unforgettable night. A final powerful connection with their king. A little over a month later, on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley passed away. The world was plunged into shock and mourning. But his music, his legacy, and the echo of those screams lived on. Even in death, his crown remained. It wasn't just the memory of one sold-out stadium, but the collective memory of every single person whose life he had touched. It was the enduring power of his music, still played on radios, still streamed online, still inspiring new generations of artists and fans. It was the image of the shy boy from Tupelo who dared to dream, who shook up the world, and who became a global phenomenon without ever losing his connection to the common man. His crown, the sound of a sold-out stadium screaming his name, became eternal. It lives on in every new fan who discovers his music, in every old record spun, in every documentary watched. It's the hum of his guitar, the tremor in his voice, the shake of his hips. It's the joy, the excitement, the shared experience he gave to millions. And even now, if you listen closely, you can still hear it, that magnificent, joyous, eternal scream, the sound of a king who wore his crown, not on his head, but in the hearts of his devoted subjects. Forever, he was, and always will be, the king.